What's up, y'all? So, continuing with my NFL content here, I really wanted to create a new type of video where I kind of do like a divisional breakdown for each division. So, yeah, today we're going to start off with the AFC South because, that's where my Texans are in, and that's the division I know the most about. Alright, so let's get started here. So, starting with the Titans, they added Lloyd Cushenberry, one of the better setters in free agency. They added Tony Pollard at running back, Calvin Ridley at receiver. They also added Tyler Boyd at receiver as well. They traded for L'Jarius Sneed from the Chiefs. They drafted J.C. Laham, number 7 overall. They also drafted T'Vondre Sweat, round 2 overall. Looking at their losses, so obviously they lost star running back Derrick Henry. They lost defensive lineman Danico Artrey, linebacker Azeez Al-Shahir, and they also lost corner Sean Murphy-Bunting. Looking at their additions, I think they're pretty solid overall. I really like the Sneed pickup at corner, and I like their draft as well. I think drafting an offensive lineman, number 7, especially J.C. Laham, I think that was a really, really good pick to protect Will Levis. I also think T'Vondre Sweat's going to be a really, really good rusher in the defensive tackle spot, and I think he's a really big body who's going to be able to put a lot of pressure on the quarterback. And it's obviously pretty sad to lose Derrick Henry here in free agency, but last year, their rookie running back, Tajay Spears, I thought he showed a lot of flashes, and I think that, I could see him develop into, like, a speed and explosive threat, and most likely, I could see Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears probably splitting reps in the backfield this year, and I think that's going to be a pretty solid, backfield to look out for. Obviously, they also picked out some other linebackers in free agency to replace Azeez Al-Shahir, and they also used their 4th-round pick on Cedric Gray, who is also a linebacker. And so, they also have a new coach coming in Brian Callahan, and he's going to replace Mike Vrabel. Brian Callahan was the offensive coordinator for the Bengals. He was there from 2019 to 2023. He worked with Joe Burrow, and he could help develop Will Levis into a solid quarterback. And, he's also been coaching the NFL since 2010, so that really adds a lot of credibility to his overall resume. And, they also still have DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver 1, who I think is a really, really solid wide receiver, and I think that he's just going to be a really consistent wide receiver for the team. And, I think that Will Levis could have a breakout year here, especially with, adding Ridley and Boyd to DeAndre Hopkins. I think that that's a lot of threats, and honestly, I think that the coaches have a lot of leverage here to decide what they want to do. But I think that Will Levis, he has all the tools to have a breakout season, and I think he could really do it. I think overall they're a pretty solid team, and they had some pretty good pickups. Obviously had a couple big losses there, but I think they're like kind of a dark horse team here. I could see them actually getting around 7 to 8 wins looking at their schedule. And, that's definitely improvement from last year. I think they had 6 wins. I think they're definitely a better team than last year, and I'm interested to see how the season will play out for them. Going on to my next team here, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars. So their main additions include Arik Armstead at defensive tackle. And just pausing here, I think that's a really big pickup considering that their interior D-line wasn't very good last year. He's going to be able to rush with Josh Allen, who just changed his name to Josh Hines Allen, and Tre'Davious Walker off the edge. So I think they're going to be really, really good at putting pressure on the quarterback and making the quarterback, make some tough decisions. And they're also going to be really good at stopping the run. Looking at their other additions, they added Gabe Davis at receiver. They also added Darnell Savage to increase safety depth. And, with Andre Sisco coming up on his contract year this year after his rookie contract expires, I think that they're going to be a pretty solid safety core overall. And then you also look at Brian Thomas, a receiver they drafted round 1. I think he's going to be really, really good. I was hoping the Texans were going to get him before they traded their pick, but I think he's going to be a pretty solid receiver. And then you also look, they drafted Mason Smith, defensive tackle round 2, and Jaron Jones, cornerback round 3. So really honing in on defense there this free agency period, especially with their defensive tackles. And, I think they're going to be a pretty solid team looking at their defense. Looking at their losses, their only main one really was Calvin Ridley. Obviously, I think that they did a pretty good job with picking up Gabe Davis and picking wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. in the draft to kind of replace him. And I think the receiver core actually looks pretty good whenever you add Christian Kirk to those 2 receivers. And, I think that T-Law, he can have a breakout season this year, just like Will Levis. I think that he has the weapons around him. I think he's going to need to have a breakout year for them to make any noise this year. You look at his stats last year, 4,016 passing yards, 21 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. It's not horrible, but his numbers were down from last year, and he's still not really living up to the hype that people were expecting him to have out of college. You also look at their running back in Travis Etienne. He's a beast, and, I think he's going to be really, really good for a while, especially in fantasy last year. I thought Etienne was really, really good. Every time I had to play against him, he would always destroy me. But going past that, their coach is Doug Peterson. He's going to be staying. I expect them to keep him there for a couple more seasons just to see how he plays out with Trevor Lawrence. He's only been there since 2022, so, you know, I could see them staying there until, like, his contract expires, to be honest with you. So, yeah, overall, I think they're another pretty solid team. You know, I think that they're also going to get 7 to 8 wins this year, just looking at their schedule, which is actually really tough, in my opinion. You know, the AFC South is pretty tough this year as well. I think they're a really good team, and I think if they're honestly in a different division, they could do a lot better, but I think it's going to be tough for them to win in the AFC South. Looking at the Indianapolis Colts here, so they didn't really have many additions other than Joe Flacco. They also picked up Leitu Ladu in the first round, Adonai Mitchell in the second round, and Monis Goncalves, an offensive tackle, in the third round. And they really just focus on keeping key players here in free agency. So they picked up Grover Stewart, Zaire Franklin, Michael Pittman Jr., and Kenny Moore II. So, yeah, they're really, it just seems like trying to run it back this year, which I don't think is a bad idea, especially considering you're going to have Anthony Richardson back this year. Their losses include Zach Moss, Isaiah McKenzie, and Gardner Minshew. So, yeah, no big losses, really. You know, it looks like they're just trying to run it back, like I said, with some new rookies on the squad, which I think might actually work out pretty well for them. I really like Anthony Richardson as a player, and I think that he can develop into something big. You know, obviously, last year he had some concussions and other injuries that held him back. You know, I think if he can stay healthy, he's actually going to be a really, really good player. I talked about this my last video about the underrated teams where the Colts were involved, but, you know, their backfield running ability with Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson is going to be amazing. I think, you know, as long as them two can stay healthy, they're going to be really, really good. And I think it's going to be hard to stop. In my opinion, I think that, you know, they're top 2 in the league. I think that the Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry backfield in Baltimore is probably better than them, but I still think they're really good. And then you also look at their receiving core. So obviously they still have Michael Pittman, they have second-year receiver Josh Downs, and now they have rookie Adonai Mitchell. So, you know, I think it's a really, really good receiving core for right now, and since they're all so young, I think it's going to be really, really good for the future. And, you know, looking on top of that, Anthony Richardson's still super young, so I think if you just keep those core guys together, you're going to be a really good team for a while. You know, I think their defense overall could definitely have some improvements. They're like in the middle of the pack for the whole NFL in general. I wouldn't say they're as good as the Ravens, but still pretty solid defense. I would rank them probably like top 12 to 16 in my teams. But, you know, I think that they honestly could take the division from the Texans this year with, you know, them having an easier schedule and having Anthony Richardson presumably for the whole season instead of Gardner Minshew. And, you know, we saw last year Gardner Minshew actually almost took the division from them. And so if they actually have, you know, Anthony Richardson playing, they could honestly take the division. But overall, looking at how many wins I think they could get, I think around 10 to 11 seems pretty reasonable considering their schedule. And I really like the upside the team has overall, and I would watch out for them, especially if they make the playoffs this year. All right, looking at my last team, I have my Houston Texans. So their key additions, they have Azeez Al-Shaair at linebacker, Joe Mixon at running back, who they traded for, Danielle Hunter as a defensive end, Stephon Diggs at receiver, who they also traded for, Danico Archery at defensive tackle, who they signed in free agency, Kamari Laziter was their second-round pick. He's a defensive back. Blake Fisher, offensive tackle in the second round as well. They also drafted Kalen Bullock, safety, in the third round. And they also extended Nico Collins at receiver, which I thought was really, really big, especially for showing, you know, people that we're willing to compete for years to come. You know, as long as we have CJ Stroud, I think we're going to be able to do that, but I'll go into that later. Looking at their losses here, obviously, Blake Cashman at linebacker, Malik Collins, defensive tackle, Jonathan Grenard was the big one. He had a really good season last year, and defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins. Overall, I feel like if you look at their gains and their losses, I think that they improved at every position that they lost. You look at Azeez Al-Shaair, I think he's better than Blake Cashman. Danielle Hunter, I think, is better than Jonathan Grenard. So I think that those are some really, really big pickups there. And also Devin Singletary, who they lost. I feel like Joe Mixon's still slightly better. Even though he's a little older, I think that, you know, he's still got some explosiveness in him. So obviously CJ Stroud also had a breakout season last year, and it's going to be very interesting to see if he can keep up his consistency, even with all the pressure he's facing, which I think he'll be able to, considering how he's already handled the pressure and the fame that's come to him. You know, I think that Joe Mixon's going to allow for more explosiveness in the backfield, like I just said before. And, you know, I think that the defense is a lot more improved. And obviously, they already had a really solid defense last year. And, you know, I think Derek Stingley is still super underrated corner. Like, looking at his stats, he allowed less than 100 yards this year whenever he was targeted, which is kind of insane. Azeez is also a great addition. And you also have Danielle Hunter, who I already talked about. But he was actually top 5 in sacks last year, which I feel like is pretty underlooked in my opinion. And, you know, I think that, honestly, they had one of the best off seasons in the NFL. I wouldn't say they had the best off season. I would say it was a pretty solid overall, though. I think the team has a lot of upside and room to compete this year, as long as Stroud stays healthy and as long as, you know, the team stays committed and they have a lot of chemistry, which I think is naturally going to happen just because you have D'Amico Ryans as your head coach. He's a very energetic person, and he's super young, and he used to be a player on the Texans, so all he wants is for them to succeed. And, you know, just looking at their schedule overall, I could honestly see them winning 12 to 13 games this season, even with the tough schedule. I think they're definitely going to be a team to look out for, and I think that they're honestly a contender for the Super Bowl, which is kind of crazy for me to say, because if you were to tell me 2 years ago that is where the Texans would be right now, I would not believe you at all. Like, it's been a crazy turnaround. So yeah, that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you guys for checking it out. I'm gonna put all my links in the description down below. Once again, it has my Twitter, TikToks, and it also has my blog, so make sure you guys check all those out. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you guys like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.